Hey everyone, it's Lanae. Today is Tuesday, February 12th, 2019, and a good afternoon to all of you. So, this has been long overdue, but I'm finally doing it. This is my coming out to my family as transgender video. Let's get started. So, I came out to my parents on New Year's Eve while we were out having dinner. I had no intentions of going about it this way. So let's go back to the first day that I arrived, December 21st, 2018. At this time, I had only been at my parents' house for about an hour, not long at all. I told both my parents the story of when my cousin painted my nails when I was 3, and how I was willing to let her do it, and the fact that I liked it. I also mentioned that Dad threw a fit when he saw it. He scraped the toenail polish off my nails with a fingernail file. Then I revealed my red toenail polish to them. My dad stood there and kind of smiled, and my mom asked, "Why red?" I think they thought that this was intended to be some kind of nostalgic joke. But in fact, it was no joke. It was serious business. I knew I had to be brave enough to be myself while I was there on vacation. I wanted to enjoy my time there, so prior to coming home for the holidays, I vowed to be myself as much as possible. So I wore leggings, skinny jeans, and a little makeup on occasion, never a lot. So the next day, we all met up down in Daytona to meet my sister, her son, and my brother-in-law. It had been a year since I had seen or spoken to my younger sister, so I was really excited to see her. And once we got there, the first thing that she noticed was my skin. She said that it was glowing, and she asked if I had been doing microdermabrasion. I told her no, and I asked her, "What is that? I've never heard of it." Then my mother said that she noticed it the night before. I'm pretty sure that it was the makeup that I was wearing, or the effects of HRT, or maybe a combination of the two. But we didn't spend a lot of time talking about that. The topic of my complexion came up as we were leaving the restaurant that evening. I told my sister that I have a basic skincare routine, nothing special. My older nephew came back to my parents' house with us that evening. I showed both the boys my nails. They both laughed. I told them that if they wanted to borrow my nail polish, they're more than welcome to. Neither one was interested, but I think it's safe to say that I probably would have been game when I was 9 or even 16. I found out later on that my older sister kind of took offense to it, and I talked to her about it. Everything's okay now, but she didn't really like me asking her son if he would like to paint his nails. I was only joking. I wasn't serious about it. I could tell that my older sister didn't like it when I showed her my painted nails. I told her the story of what happened back when I was 3, and she said, "Yeah, I remember that. I was at the house that day. It was at my aunt's house. We were visiting our relatives in Mississippi that summer." This was way back in the 80s. Things seemed to be working out just fine. No one really said much about my personal style. Christmas was absolutely nice. We had an amazing dinner, and I baked a buttercream cake, and later on I baked gingerbread cookies, which were excellent. I took a day trip up to Savannah on the December 30th, the day before New Year's Eve. It was actually warm enough for shorts that day, so I decided to wear a pair of denim high-rise shorts. My parents were getting ready for church that morning. It was a Sunday. That morning, my mom asked where I bought the shorts from. I told her Target, and she asked if they were men's shorts. And I didn't want to lie to my mom, so I told her no, they are not. I told her the truth. Then I explained to my mother that it was okay and that no one would really notice anyway. All that really mattered was that I liked them. My dad was in the bathroom or one of the other bedrooms in the back of the house, so I don't think he heard our conversation that morning. So the next morning on New Year's Eve, I was about to go out with my mother. I told her that I wanted to go for a pedicure while we were out. It had been a while since I had actually gone out and had one. I usually do my own. Then she mentioned my nails again and said that people will probably think I'm gay because I have my nails painted. I said, who cares what other people think? And what about women who don't paint their nails? Because not all women do. Then my mom asked the question, do you want to be a woman? I couldn't give her a definite answer. She really caught me off guard. Instead, my response was, just because someone paints their nails doesn't necessarily mean that they want to be female. And I left it at that. And she told me that my dad didn't like it. My dad didn't mention anything about it to me, but my dad is passive aggressive about these types of things. He doesn't really say much, but it just builds and builds and builds. Then he finally says something and lets it all out. And she told me that my dad said that he raised me as his son and not his daughter. My mom asked the question again while we were out that morning about my gender identity and my gender expression. Once again, I didn't give her an answer. I couldn't. I just didn't have it in me. My vacation had been going really well thus far, and I didn't want to ruin it with me being out to my parents. I didn't think it was the right time. But this time I told my mother how I felt as a child, a teenager, and a young adult. And right around this time, her cell phone started ringing. It was my dad. Once that phone conversation ended, it was a complete change of subject. I was feeling like my parents would ask me more about this, either on the morning that I leave or the night before, and we would all have a talk about it. So my parents took me out for dinner on New Year's Eve. They took me to a new restaurant that I had wanted to try. My older sister wasn't feeling well that evening, so she and her son, my nephew, went back to their place instead. So it was only the three of us at the restaurant that evening. The restaurant was pretty busy that night. It took a while for the three of us to be seated, but we were willing to wait because it was where I wanted to eat. Everything seemed to be going okay. We had an appetizer and our food finally arrived. Then a pregnant lady walked past our table, and my dad said something to the effect of, "We are thankful that you didn't bring someone home pregnant." It was not mean-spirited at all, and I don't quite remember exactly what my dad said to me. And I asked both my mom and dad, "Do you really want to know the truth?" And I said, "Women have never really been interested in me." Then I broke down and started to cry, right there at the table in front of everyone. I had been on HRT for 5 months almost at this time. Not once had I cried, but this time I couldn't control it. I put my head down on the table and started crying even more. I took off my glasses. My dad told me to lift my head up, to bring my head up. I couldn't do it. I started to cry again as we walked outside in the parking lot that evening. It had been a long time since I had cried like this. Probably not since I was a child. I'm not a crier by nature. That's never been me. My dad asked me what was the matter, what was wrong. I told my dad I was never really masculine enough. And my dad told me that none of that matters and that I do have validation as a man. And he told me just because I had a hard time getting dates or getting attention from women, that it didn't make me any less of a man, any less masculine. And it didn't determine my self-worth, which is true. It doesn't. None of that does. But the truth is that I was never really a man, no matter how hard I tried to be one. And this is when I told my dad in the parking lot that evening at the restaurant that I was transgender. My dad started shaking his head no. A feeling of shame and guilt came over me because I had just hurt my dad, and I didn't want to hurt anyone. I've only wanted to be myself. I told my dad that I didn't choose this. This is what God has chosen for me. We walked back to the car. My dad unlocked the door, and I sat down in the back seat and started crying again. I remember telling my dad that I would pack up all of my things and leave tonight if he wanted me to, and go back home. My dad never told me to leave, neither did my mom. So my dad went back inside the restaurant to tell my mother that he thinks it's best that we go home. I went back inside after I stopped crying. I asked my mother to come outside with me while my dad took care of things inside. So we went out to the car. I sat down in the back seat, and that's when I came out to my mother as transgender. And I asked her if she could accept me. She said yes. On the ride home that night, we spoke nothing of what had just happened. My dad didn't say much at all, but my mom and we were talking. I tried to finish the rest of my dinner once we got back to my parents' house that evening, but I just didn't have much of an appetite. I didn't even feel like staying up until midnight to ring in the new year. All I wanted to do was get into bed and sleep for a long time. As I was walking back to my bedroom that night from the kitchen to get a glass of water, I noticed that my dad was in my old bedroom, the room that I grew up in. He called me in, and my mom walked in shortly after. I was pretty tired, so I laid down, and my parents both sat down on the other twin-size bed. There was silence for a few seconds. Then my dad said to me that he senses throughout my life there have been people who have caused me tremendous amounts of hurt and emotional pain, and that he resents each one of them for that. And my dad told me that people who have wronged me throughout my life don't determine my self-worth. Only I can. Then he said that we're not mad at you, but we are hurt. We're hurting right now. My dad told me that God made me a man and that he doesn't support me on my decision to transition. And he said that I did, in fact, choose to be transgender. I don't think I've chosen to be transgender. I did choose to transition, but I was transgender before I started my transition. And if I could choose, if I had a choice, I wouldn't be transgender. Then my mother said that God doesn't make mistakes. I told her that she's right, that God made me this way for a reason. He has a purpose for my life. He wants me to live my truth instead of being someone I'm not. My mom didn't argue, and I wasn't going to argue with my parents. I felt like my mother understood more than my dad did. My mother told me that she is very concerned about my safety because the statistics show that transgender women of color, especially those of us who are African American, are more at risk for being murdered, suicides, and that we're more likely to be mistreated and not accepted in society. My dad had to leave the room to lay down because he was beginning to have back pain. My mom and I talked for a little while longer. After talking with my parents, I felt like staying up to ring in the new year. It was maybe 15 minutes until midnight. My older sister and her son, my 9-year-old nephew, were staying over that night. I wanted them to stay. I asked my mother if she could have them over too. I just wanted to be with my family that night. So all of us, except for my dad, watched the ball drop from Times Square. It had been several years since I spent New Year's Eve with my family. I still had one full day in Florida until I flew back home to Colorado. New Year's Day was okay. My dad was distant with me. I knew that he was grieving. I'm willing to give everyone as much time as they need to accept this. I know this is hard for all of us. It's hard for me. But it's even harder for me to live a lie, to be someone I'm not. I can't do it anymore, and I don't want to do it anymore. The next morning, January 2nd, I was packing up the last of my things. My mother walks into the bedroom and she gives me some lotion from Bed Bath & Beyond. It smelled really good. A couple nights before, I asked her if I could use some of hers. I liked the fragrance a lot. She initially gave each one of my sisters one as stocking stuffers. Little did she know that she would want to give one to me, too. As we said our goodbyes at the airport that morning, as always, I hugged both of my parents, and I thanked them for everything. I told them that I loved them, and this time I told both of them to take all the time that they need. My dad went back and got in the car. My mother stayed with me a little bit longer. She told me to text them when I get home. In the past, I would always call them. By this time, I wasn't officially out to either one of my sisters yet. They both knew that something was going on and that I got upset at the restaurant on New Year's Eve. But they didn't know exactly what was going on, and they were concerned. But I assured them that I'm okay, that everything's going to be fine. Nearly 2 weeks had gone by. I just didn't feel like I was prepared to tell my sisters. I was feeling a lot of guilt about coming out to my parents. I didn't have any intentions of coming out to them the way that I did, when I did. It was just one of those things that happened. My younger sister called me on January 13th. I was at work at the time, so I texted her and I told her that I would call her later that evening. We talked that evening for almost 2 hours. I told her that I was transgender and that I had been on HRT for 5.5 months. My younger sister told me that it did cross her mind at the restaurant that night that I might be transitioning. She noticed that I was wearing makeup and that my demeanor and my mannerisms appeared to be more feminine. And she told me that she couldn't get over how much I looked like my mother. I took this as a compliment. My sister said that she felt like she was meeting me for the first time. I told her to tell my 16-year-old nephew when the time was right. It's now the middle of February. I'm not sure if she's told him yet. I haven't talked to him since I last saw him, but I hope to hear from him sooner than later. Everything went well with my younger sister. She accepts me. I called my older sister on January 16th, and we talked for a long time, about 2 hours also. I was really worried about how I would come out to my older sister. Her husband died back in 2011 due to heart failure. He was only 37. She experienced trauma from that. She can easily become emotional. She cried a little when I told her. She was concerned about my safety because we live in a dangerous world. That's the reality. It went well, and my older sister accepts me. And we both agreed that she and my mother would tell my nephew, who's 9 years old, when the time is right. I don't know if he knows yet either. But I want all of them to know that I do love them and that I'm still the same person. So I'm out as transgender to my immediate family. Honestly, I didn't plan for it to turn out this way, but I am now at peace with it. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm thankful that I do have their love and support, or at least some of it, as much as I have. Hopefully I'll have more as time goes by. I've talked to my parents a couple of times. Things are, pretty tough right now for all of us. This year hasn't been a great year for me so far, and we're only in the month of February. I lost my job. I'm losing my home in a couple months. And I'm not sure what's going to happen or where I'll end up. All we can do is continue to move forward. and not focus on what's wrong in our lives. I do sense that my parents are still grieving, my dad especially. He told me yesterday that this has been the most difficult time of his life. He says that I chose the ways of the world. I don't agree with that part, but I am choosing to be myself. And I know that God still loves me and that God accepts me. I've been on HRT now for about 6.5 months. I haven't filmed a 6-month video yet. I'm hoping to get around to it soon. But I've been dealing with a lot lately, taking it one day at a time. I know eventually that things will get better. That I do know. To all a good day, and God bless. Excuse me. Hey, I'm trying to make a video here.